I do want to bring in the chief economist on the National Economic Council, Joe Lavorgna. Hi, Joe. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi. Thank you, Greta. Thank you for having me.
The headline swirling today is job growth slowed sharply in November, with most media outlets painting this as a negative report. What's your takeaway from the data, though, and where are the positives?
Well, the media, unfortunately, much of it, and I've been critical of it, have basically been reporting how the economy was going to slow at some point. So there's nothing new there. You're correct in stating that the headline was a bit weaker than what people thought, but there was some really good news in the report as well, which needs to be highlighted. You mentioned the unemployment rate falling to 6.7. That's a new post-pandemic low. We're down 54% from where we were back in April when we were just under 15%. Within that number, private employment rose almost 500,000, which is fantastic. And if you look at all the major ethnic groups, Asian Americans, African Americans, Caucasians, Hispanics, we saw unemployment fall. So there's some really good news there, and falling unemployment is consistent with rapidly expanding GDP growth. It's what macroeconomists call Okun's law, and the Atlanta Fed, their closely followed GDP Now model still has growth slightly above 11% this quarter. So even though the headline was a little bit less than what consensus thought, there's a lot of really good news, Greta, and this economy still looks awfully powerful.
Today's report, Joe, does come as several states are ramping up COVID restrictions. Just yesterday, California Governor Gavin Newsom announced a regional stay-at-home order for that state. Much of California expected to be back in lockdown by next week. How will these kind of moves impact the labor market and this recovery?
That's the tricky part. Things have been, I'd argue, excellent up to this point. We saw jobless claims and continuing claims fall yesterday. So high-frequency numbers still look very good. However, you highlight a very important point. Some state and local governments are closing businesses or shuttering activity, and that could potentially weigh on the economy. It's something we're watching. Well, we would argue, though, number one, the economy that President Trump built is extraordinarily strong. It has great foundational support. So if there's a slowing, it's non-fundamental. And more importantly, the vaccine news is great. Operation Warp Speed was phenomenal, so the vaccine is coming, and that's a real key reason why investors and forward-looking, stock investors we've seen record high equity prices this week because they're looking past any potential slowdown, which should be temporary. So we'll see what happens with the data. Maybe things will still turn out to be better than people think. I'm an optimist at heart, so we'll see.
Stimulus talks are continuing on Capitol Hill. McConnell and Pelosi say they're both optimistic that they can reach a compromise. When you're looking at the data, what sectors of the economy at this point could still benefit from more help?
Well, the president has talked about getting aid to airlines. That's certainly important. He's talked about that for some time. We were hoping some of our Democratic colleagues on this side of the aisle would have come along. The payroll protection plan, the PPP, has been extraordinarily successful. We'd like money for that, money for COVID, to keep the schools open and keep testing accessible. I mean, those are all things that are certainly very bipartisan. The president, through Herculean effort, used executive orders to the best visibility to help folks this past summer, and negotiations are continuing, which is good, and we'll see what happens. But certainly we'd like to give people extra assistance. Even though we're in this V-shaped boom, or a super V-shaped boom, as the president likes to say, there's certainly still a lot of hardship and pain out there, and if we could do more to help people, that's always what we've tried to do. We just need some help on the other side of the aisle.
Another piece of economic data that we got today was the trade deficit for October from the Commerce Department. That did rise, but less than expected. Trade is, of course, a key part of GDP here in the U.S. Exports are rising sharply, higher than imports. What are you expecting for fourth quarter GDP after we saw record-breaking growth in the third?
The Atlanta Fed is pretty good. They're saying 11%, and that's their number. I mean, we'll see if that comes to pass. Not being now in the private sector, Greta, I don't have to give a forecast. But if you take the Atlanta Fed numbers at 11%, that'll leave the economy down less than 1%, 0.9%. Lower than where it was last year at this time, which also marks the pre-pandemic peak in economic output. And if I had to venture a guess, if you asked professional forecasters as recently as just a few months ago, if they would have believed the economy could be down less than 1% on the year, I don't think many people would have believed it possible. I really don't. So that's where I talk about context. And unfortunately, we don't get the credit we deserve, specifically the president and his tireless effort in getting the economy back and having an optimistic spirit.
Want to see more videos like this? Visit OANN.com for immediate access to all the clips you've been waiting to see.